I am Allison Sasso. I am 39 years old, and I am the owner of Veil and Vow Tarot, your personal tarot reader in Kansas City. That's me. I also have a Bachelor of Science in Geography and a Master of Arts in Teaching degree, so I know what it sounds like when I say woo-woo and weird stuff. Like, I know what I sound like. I used to teach. I know what I sound like.
What is death?
What is death? The first thing that popped into my brain was the absence of life. And I'm like, that's a terrible answer. From a scientific perspective, I guess death would be when the heart is no longer beating and the brain is no longer functioning. The metaphysical perspective kind of ties into that a little bit insofar as death is when we can no longer perceive anything, because what is life but our meat computers utilizing these bodies to perceive the world around us, right? So if you turn everything off, then that is death, technically. But is there something after that? Now that's the big question. So I guess go back to the beginning. Death is the cessation of living in this realm, living like this body just no longer functions. Computer off, heart off. That is death. But I think there's so much more beyond that. Like the journey afterward is so much broader than I think our understanding as mortals in this realm can comprehend. It's just death is the beginning. Like death is the start. Death is the return journey to source. So I guess clinically death is just when this all stops functioning. There are a lot of schools of thought for what happens after you die. We all know probably the Christian school of thought of if you're good, then you go to heaven, and if you're bad, then you go to hell. I don't believe in a heaven or hell. I don't believe in a deity that would permanently punish people for doing, like, how can you punish people for, like, okay, this person had tattoos and drank some, and they're on par with, like, mass murderers and genocidal maniacs. Like, no, I don't believe in that. And even with, like, horrible, murderous people out there, too, I don't think they burn eternally. And I know that that's, like, difficult for people because some people utilize religion as like their moral compass or their guide for like, I have to be good or else. And it's like, no, just be good for goodness sake. So I don't think that there's an everlasting punishment. I also don't think there's an everlasting like heaven where we're praising one deity either. When we die, in the metaphysical world, especially people who study near-death experiences and people who go cross over and then come back, talk about how there is this universal feeling of love and compassion and returning to source, whatever source may be, God, the universe, whatever, is returning to a universal love that I think we can feel sometimes here on earth, but I think people have difficulty feeling for their fellow human. Like, I think the love of a mother to a child gets close to that. Like, I would do anything for this tiny being. But it's supposed to be this universal love and compassion. And when people talk about near-death experiences, some people talk about crossing over and seeing people who have gone before them. My mom has a very specific story about that where she got COVID before we knew what COVID was. I'm convinced that that's what happened because she wound up in the ICU. It wasn't the flu. They didn't know what was wrong with her. And it was before we knew what COVID-19 was. It was before we knew what the shutdowns were going to come. Like, it was like 2 months before any of that had come out in the media and stuff. So she got really, really sick and she was in the hospital. And not only were we worried that she was going to die, but she was worried that she was going to die. And she even wrote up her Dharma will and her legacy, and she sent it to me, and she got really, really mad at like that I read it later. And I'm like, but you sent it to me to read. She got embarrassed, and I think she took it back from me, but like, whatever. I might still have access to it. But anyway, point being, She told me when I went to visit her in the hospital and she was coming out of stuff that she saw some of her friends who had passed over before her. Like they were in the room, in her hospital room, and she's like fully alert, fully awake. And her friend came to her and she goes, well, Kath, you don't look so good. And my mom's like, yeah, I don't feel so good either. And I believe that there are entities that are there that will surround us, that will come to us to help shepherd the way and to like bring us to the other side. When we get there, there are people who report not only seeing loved ones, but being surrounded by the people who we meet in this lifetime. The Buddhist perspective on this is that the people that we meet in this lifetime, we have met in previous lifetimes. So it's possible that you were my brother in a past lifetime, and we're not even related right now. We're just, people who've just met. We're friends. But it's possible that in a previous lifetime you were my brother, or you were my dog, or you were a fish that I ate that one time. And it's supposed to be this parable of like how interconnected we are. Like we are all connected. Carl Sagan, I believe, said we are all connected to each other biologically, to the earth chemically, and to the rest of the universe atomically. Like everything is interconnected, which is why this pervasive experience of like universal love is what you're supposed to return to, because we are all the same thing, essentially. And when we meet our loved ones on the other side, or the people that we're supposed to be connected to, people talk about how they share their life story, and we're all bringing knowledge back to like this universal collective. So one of the ways to look at existence, we're gonna get crazy deep. One of the ways to look at existence, another thing that Carl Sagan said, is we are a way for the cosmos to know itself. So you're the universe, okay? How are you supposed to know yourself? How are you supposed to observe yourself? Well, we humans, being a part of that cosmic order, coming up from all of this evolution, millions upon billions of years of like this expansion, and now we've gotten to the point where beings can look back into the stars and perceive the cosmos and perceive the universe, right? We are the universe, looking at the universe. We're looking at ourselves, man. It's this mirror image of like this tiny existence. We're supposed to live to take our knowledge of our existence back to the universe, to take our experience as this individual back to the collective consciousness. And then if you get into string theory and like quantum level stuff, that's when you get movies like Everything Everywhere All at Once, where not only do we have this timeline that we're in right now, but we have infinite timelines of like me being in infinite different worlds, infinite different timelines, having the same interview. Maybe in one of it, I'm a dude with a big bushy red beard. I'm dude Allison. Dallison, yes. And I think our tiny brains, because we're just these individual little for these individual tiny universes within the universe, within this infinite nature of universes, like think about you, infinite, every decision you make spawns another timeline where you still exist somewhere and you're experiencing the different choice. Okay, do I want fish or do I want burger? Well, in one timeline you picked fish, and the other timeline you picked burger, and now we go from there, okay? So we exist to bring this universal knowledge back to the universe so that we can understand like the whole experience. It's hard to put into words, but like that's part of what we're here for, is to exist, is to live, and then take that experience of living back to something that's bigger than us so that the universe can know what it's like to be an individual creature. Fish do it, birds do it, we do it, grass does it, trees do it, stars probably do it. I don't know. Everything lives, everything dies. I think people get fascinated by the concept of death for a whole host of reasons. I'm fascinated with it because it's the only thing that we're really, well, I mean, there's lots of things that we're uncertain about in this life, but like it's the only thing that we can't super confirm, no matter how hard we study it. We don't actually know exactly what happens after we die. Like, we can postulate, we can do the near-death experience thing where we interview people and look for commonalities, and we can try, but we don't actually know. It's like in the movie Hook, where I think Robin Williams' character says to die would be a great adventure, because we don't actually know what's coming, really. We can look at it from a spiritual perspective, we can look at it from a scientific perspective, we can look at it as from an atheistic perspective, where when you die, that's it, it's the end. I think the universe would be really boring if that was it. If, like, you live, you die, there's nothing else. Because if the human mind can think of way more fascinating alternatives, then it just can't be it. Like, I know it can't be it, because if we can think of things that are way more fantastical and far more interesting than just you're dead, that just doesn't bear out with how wondrous the universe already is, the magic that you see around you every day. So, like, none of us are right, is essentially it. Like, none of us are right about, like, where we're going or what's about to happen. We just all have a part of it. So I think it's fascinating to people because we don't know. And we want to, but we don't. Yeah. And when you think about it, when somebody goes, we no longer get that person in our life. We just have our memory about them. And we don't have that joy, that light, whatever they brought to our lives. So it's also fascinating and kind of an emotional thing to, like, I want to be with that person again, or I want to know that person again. So there's this fascination with, like, well, am I going to get to see them again? I don't know if it's fascination so much as it is longing, like longing for something more. But there is something more. Like, I'm pretty positive, like 99% positive, like there's much more beyond this life. So yeah. That's why I think it's so fascinating, because we just don't know. We want to know. Oh, we want to know. You don't get to. And that's one of the things I've talked to my husband about. He's like, I don't want to be drugged. I don't want to go out like zombified. I want to experience that. I want to experience that as wholeheartedly as I can, because as far as we know, we get one chance to die. So he wants to, like, go in totally eyes open. I personally wouldn't mind, like, having a little bit of pain ease, or, like, maybe smoking a little bit before I go out. I don't know. But I totally get going into it, like, eyes wide open and wanting to have that full experience. Yeah. It's the last experience that you may ever perceive. Just kidding. There's so much more beyond. I think about my own mortality every single day, probably more than your average human. And I think that's part of why I am, like, considered by many to be such a happy-go-lucky person and, like, really positive for the most part. It is the fact that life is so fragile that it becomes difficult to let myself be bogged down by all of the tragedy that exists in the world. It's not that I don't focus on it. It's not that I don't worry about it. I do. I feel so much. I feel so much. Like, my heart is massive. But everything can be taken away in an instant. And it makes me, like, really grateful that I'm still here. So I think it's almost like my brain has, like, found a way to, like, guilt trip me into being a positive person. Like, well, you never know what's going to happen. Like, you could get hit by a bus. You could get your ultrasound on your side tomorrow, which I am, and it could turn out to be cancer, terminal. You got 3 months to live. Your son could be taken from you in a tragic school shooting. They happen all the time in this country. Like, it's over. Your husband could die in a car accident on the way home, or have a heart attack because he's so stressed out. Like, it's coming. Death comes for us all. And because I think about it so much, it reminds me to be, like, really grateful for what I have, in the moment. And it's not to say that I'm always so present, like I'm here. I'm just living, man. No, I worry about the same stuff that everybody else worries about. I scroll too much on the internet. Like I freak out about stuff too, but it is a constant reminder to live while you have the chance. And I think about my demise. There's actually a really good book called Advice for Future Corpses that asks you to do this exact thought exercise. What is a good death? Imagine that you are about to die like right now or imminently. What does it look like for you to do that?
Answer that question.
Well, I know that for my mom, a good death would be to have her own spiritual experience with death, because she does not want to be surrounded by grieving relatives, by the people who love her. She wants to be surrounded by fellow Buddhists who will do the Buddhist chants, because she doesn't want to cling to the earthly realm or be brought down by like our sorrow. Because when it's time, it's time. Like she almost died one time, and everybody was like, she's in the ambulance, she's going to the hospital. And I was having a game night with my friends. And I'm like, what do I do? And they're like, nothing. Like, she's going. And I'm like, okay. And this overwhelming sense of peace and calm flooded me. And she told me later she was praying her, it's a Buddhist thing. It's not like praying the rosary, but it's like some sort of like prayer. And I was just flooded with this calm of like, well, if it's time, it's time. And I know, that's how I know that there's like so much beyond this. Like spirit works, like prayers, Christian prayer, Buddhist prayer, witches' spells, like they are real. And the energy moves and flows. And she was praying this as she's in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. And I felt it. I felt this overwhelming sense of calm. And she wants to be surrounded by people who don't cling, so that she can move beyond, because but Buddhism is all about letting go of attachment. Everything is temporary. Just like this life, everything is temporary. So we have to let go of attachment. And that doesn't mean not to love. You can love so much, but remember that this is finite. And to not cling to the material, because one day this whole planet will explode when the sun goes supernova. Earth won't exist, guys. Every single part of our history will be gone at some point. And allow yourself to let that flow and enjoy while you can. Because this is it, as far as we know. And don't cling to the material. What would my ideal death look like? I don't know. I don't want to die right now. But I also don't want to get so old that my brain starts to rot and I get dementia or Alzheimer's, because then I have this like horrible fear that like, what if because it's a possibility in my family, like that's a possibility, right? So I'm like, okay, if my meat computer starts to deteriorate and fills up with plaque and stuff, does that mean that my spirit won't like be completely whole in the afterlife? And that's also insane, because like that's not what would happen. Like your soul is not the body that you are in, right? So anyway, what would an ideal death look like? I hope it's quick and painless would be so good. Like, I don't know if I definitely don't want to see it coming, because then I would just spend time panicking and worrying. I mean, it's coming anyway. You should plan and have something in place already. Everybody should. I don't care if you're 23 years old, get a will in place. That's some good advice that I should probably take for myself. I don't have one yet, so I don't know. Get your affairs in order now. You never know what's going to happen. Would I want to be surrounded by family? I don't know. I think that's more of a thing for like the living. Like, it's for their comfort more than it would be for mine. Like, my husband's grandma, they knew she was dying of, like, mesothelioma, I think. And he got to call her and have, like, one last call. And he told her that, you know, I'm going to marry Allison. And she was so excited and, like, so thrilled. I never got to meet her. So, yeah. Well, I got to meet her at her funeral, which was, like, really sad. But, yeah. So, I don't know. I don't know if I'd want to be, like, surrounded by, like, loved ones. Probably not. I guess I want my death to be, like, a private affair. Like, let me just experience this, and you guys can just figure it out later. I don't really want to be surrounded by people. Because I don't want to be a burden. God, I don't want to be a burden. Oh, well. I have been very blessed to not have had to experience a lot of actual familial death in my life. Now, here in the next 20 years, that's about to change. But I haven't, like, had to deal with, like, a bunch of grandparents passing. Like, they did when I was, like, really, really young for the most part, so it didn't affect me as hard as it would today, for example. So most of my family has remained intact, which just means that it's just been delayed until you're coming up. So that'll be a fun wave in the next 10 to 20 years of seeing everybody just pass to the next lifetime. But I think that what started to make me think about death on a more frequent basis was when I was trying to get pregnant, when I was trying to bring life into this world, and how that just didn't seem to be in the cards for me when I started to try. I'd been told my whole life, oh, Allison, you're never going to have any problems getting pregnant. We get pregnant, we stay pregnant. This family is, like, good to go. Well, don't believe everything that you hear. And just because your family history has been, like, super easy doesn't mean it's going to be easy for you. So I got pregnant, so excited, over the moon, and then I miscarried, a phrase that I hate because I carried every single baby that I've ever had as hard as I could. So I know that miscarriage is a lot more common than people talk about. So to any moms out there, you didn't miscarry. And then I got pregnant again, and I was terrified because, you know, you've already experienced one death. And it matters. Like, it was only like 6 or 8 weeks along, but you get filled with, like, this hope, and that's taken away. And so you're panicking, right? Like, okay, well, and then I miscarried again, and I was like a deflating balloon. And I went to a tarot reader before I became a professional tarot reader. And this is why you have to really watch out who you go to read your palm, your cards, your runes, your whatever, because it was at the Renaissance Festival. How dare you? And this woman told me that the reason that I couldn't stay pregnant was because I was a bad mom in a past life. What? Can you believe that? Yeah. So that was damaging. And I just automatically believed her. I'm like, that must be it. That must be it, because what I was told my whole life is I would never have problems. So maybe I was just a terrible mom. So I get pregnant a third time, and I panicked the entire pregnancy. Like, I was stressed out. I knew that it just wasn't gonna, like, it was never gonna be, like, there was so much emotion that happened. And it didn't turn out that way. Like, he lived, and he is the son that I have today. And I was so happy. I was so thrilled. I was over the moon. But every single day, he's about to be 8. Every single night, I go into his room and check on him just to make sure he's still alive. That's how traumatizing that whole process was. I know that we're a little bit past sudden infant death syndrome at 8, but you just never know. So I have to check him out. And then I got pregnant again because I wanted so desperately to bring in a brother or a sister, and it turned out that that baby had a lot of problems and we had to terminate. So, yeah, that's probably where a lot of the fascination with like death, dying, and the afterlife came from. A lot of guilt, a lot of shame. But I didn't want to suffer anymore. And I didn't want my son to suffer either. Either of them. God, there is no stopping the suffering. Like, and that's one of the things that I wish like humanity understood more, but we don't think about because we're these individual beings who forget that we're part of something so much bigger, is that we are all suffering all the time. And some people's suffering is like way greater, I get it, but that suffering is suffering. And whatever we can do to ease the suffering of others is what we're supposed to be doing. For me, for one, I didn't even process any of it. Like, I just drank a bunch of wine and smoked a bunch of weed. So, yeah. And I feel like I've processed a lot more of it now, you know, with therapy and like journaling and reading about the occult and magic and learning about death and stuff. So, I don't know. But it's still always going to be a part of me. It's still always going to be like a part of my own story. But everybody has their story too. And all of those stories are so important and so mesmerizing. Every single person that you see has their own personal story. And I think that's part of why like cemeteries exist, because we want to be remembered. We want like these tiny monuments to a life lived here, like a life existed. And there's the concept of, I think it's in Beowulf, where we live as long as we are remembered. Like we live as long as people remember our names. And after that, like that's the true death. Like when nobody remembers who you are. And that's why I think like people put up these monuments. And I've had arguments with well, it's not really an argument, but I've had discussions with my dad, because my dad, like, you know, when people die in the highway, they put up like little crosses and stuff and like tiny monuments. And he told me one time, he was like, I don't really like those. And he didn't mean it in a mean way. He just was like, I don't know why people do that. And I'm like, I do, because people want other people to know that there was a life that ended right here. And it's important. And while I think that cemeteries in general are kind of a waste of space, hear me out, okay? Like, the chemicals that we put into bodies are bad for the earth, they're bad for the environment, they leach into our water systems. Like, you don't need all of the stuff that they try and sell you when somebody dies. Like, you don't need to buy a fancy, expensive coffin, like, that's satin lined and all of this stuff. I understand the wanting to give something to the dead, like an offering to the dead, like we love you this much, okay? I get that concept, but it's also a waste of your time and money for the most part. The chemicals are terrible. And what are we really preserving something for? After they're in the ground, you're never gonna see them again. So generally speaking, kind of a waste, and bad for the environment. But I understand also, and I'm fascinated by going to cemeteries and reading the headstones. And I want everybody to do that. Like, if you get the chance, go to your local cemeteries. You don't have to have anybody buried there to walk around and look at the tiny lives and see what people put on those stones. Like, there's one that's on the way into Parkville, and it was so tragic because it was a child's grave, which are always like the worst, and it said, how many hopes we buried here. Like, I know that that's so sad, but that just speaks to like this universal like love that we need to have for one another, because we all experience these horrible, tragic things. we need to be more compassionate to each other, okay? Because time is short. And if you go to the East Coast ever, and you go to like the cemeteries from the 1600s, whoo, those cemetery graves are badass because they have these whole long like paragraphs of, they're just so cool. Every single one. I wrote down a whole bunch of them and I can't remember a single one right now, but they say the coolest shit and they have like skulls with wings on them and stuff. Badass. I love it so much because like death was so much more present when we didn't have modern, medicine and science to be able to forestall death for as long as possible. So it was just so much more a part of people's lives. In Victorian times, when people were just dying left and right of whatever would come your way, they would have these little bottles that they would give to mourners at funerals, and people would fill them up with their tears and would give those tears to like the family to say your relative that passed, your loved one that passed was loved this much. Like this many tears were shed for this person. Isn't that crazy?
Weird.
Oh, what do I want when I die? For the longest time, I wanted to be turned into a tree because I read about that in the book Stiff by Mary Roach. Great book about like what happens to the soul and the spirit and stuff after we die. She did tons of research. Really good book. I have it if you want to borrow it. But it was the first time I read about being turned into a tree. But it turns out, after reading Advice for Future Corpses, that's not as easy as you might think. Like, I'd love for my body to be put in a pod with a tree so that people could go to a tree and like remember me, and they could put up a little tiny like little garden plaque of like Allison Sasso's tree, she was rad. But it's incredibly difficult for that to happen. Like, try and find a Kansas City company that does that. It doesn't exist. So then there's also cremation, which is not super great for the environment either because of just how much power and effort it takes to cremate a body. It's better than burial, which again leaches a bunch of chemicals into the ground unless you opt for just like pine box, nothing. But there's a newer thing that's coming out that I think people should really consider for themselves, and that's water cremation, which is something I don't fully understand, but it's becoming more popular to where they put your body in kind of like a tank, and they use the force of water to break it apart, and it doesn't take that long, and it's much better for the environment. It's not instant, but it's very fast, and it's so much better for the environment. So water cremation, I think, would be kind of ideal, although there are not many companies that offer it currently. I would like some sort of like tiny plaque somewhere. I don't know where exactly, but like, tiny monument to like a life was lived. Because I don't know that I'm gonna do anything like that's gonna put me in the history books, so to speak, but it'd be nice to be like, oh, hey, there was a person who had this name that lived at this time. Cool. Humans have been trying to be remembered forever. We've got cave paintings from people hunting, aurochs that don't exist anymore. So we're always trying to throw ourselves into the future. That's why we have kids, not just because like it sustains the species, but like that's a form of immortality that people can try to achieve. Like if I throw my genetic material into the future, then maybe in some way I will be remembered. Legacy can be looked at in a lot of ways. The legacy that one lives, in my own estimation, like the way that you make people feel is, in my opinion, the best legacy that you can leave. Like, it'd be nice if we could all be like famous for doing really great philanthropical things and like helping people, and we can in our own way. Like, we can help people, we can volunteer, we can do good things, we can be bright shining stars in our own way. But most of us aren't going to really be remembered for very long. We won't leave like bodies of literature or movies or songs behind after us. We're not going to be like, most of us aren't going to be terrible humans that get on the news for like, well, this person killed, was a mass murderer. Like, we're not all going to be like serial killers remembered for like nefarious things either. So the vast majority of humans, since the dawn of time, are not remembered. But I think that legacy in general is, if you can leave something, do. But if you can't, make lives of people around you like better and help others, because that's how you're going to be remembered in a fond way. And I think the legacy is, again, how people feel. I've thought about legacy in general since I heard the poem Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley. And it talks about how everything is temporary. Everything that you think is a great work will one day be nothing. Gosh, how does it start? I met a traveler in an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that sculptor well those passions red, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words remain, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far, far away." We will all be dust one day. You might have been the biggest king in the world with all of these monuments, everything that you have built, and those too will fall to ruin, and all that will remain is dust. So legacy is to be a good human and to do good things and to help people, because even if you built yourself a monument, that's going to fall down one day too.